Welcome back, fellow dissidents. We are continuing on our journey today of expanding the podcast and the content that we're creating. I had a special guest today, Cruz Marquis, and he's a former veteran Marine. He's diving into the liberty sphere. He's a conservative, and I feel like we had a good banter about just feeling out the basics and such. And without further ado, I bring to you the interview with Cruz Marquis. We're just gonna record or whatever. So basically, to start off, I'm the host of the State of Dissidence podcast. It's nothing big. It's essentially just libertarian sphere, politics, culture war nonsense, the usual. But if you could just start by addressing who you are, what your politics are, the baseline stuff.
Indeed. Howdy. My name's Cruz Marquis. I study economics in my free time. I've got associates in that. I'm working on a bachelor's. And yeah, essentially, my politics can be summed up as the bleeding edge of classical liberalism. I'm not willing to surrender the word liberal to the people who hate liberalism. So I'm going to keep sticking with that no matter how outdated it is. And yeah, just for convenience, sometimes I call myself a libertarian, but I'm 100% on board with the paleo strategy. I am a man of the right at the end of the day. I take faith in God very seriously, and I believe, like the ancients did, that we can only have a good society with a virtuous citizenry. And
Sure.
this is something that's completely forgotten in modern politics. People think that, like Rothbard said, that the state is like some crazy Santa Claus organization.
Right. Yeah, yeah. That's fascinating. I know there's a less of a movement nowadays to try to readopt liberalism, and it's got a negative connotation to it. The modern Democrat establishment is called liberal when we know that they're everything but liberal. They're obviously illiberal. The classical definition would be someone like Ludwig von Mises. That is a liberal. That is the liberal tradition. But good on you. Good on you for trying to harvest that word back. I know there's some folks that hold on to it. I'm not particularly of the vantage point of titles. I mean, I'm of the. Are you familiar with Michael Malice? I would
Yes,
assume.
I haven't read too much of his stuff, but
Okay.
what I've seen so far in some collections is very impressive.
Yeah, yeah. He's a very intellectual cat, and he's. I mean, if you pay attention to his politics, he's an ANCAP. He's an anarcho-capitalist, but he claims himself to be an anarchist without the labels. He holds in high regard people like Emma Goldman and the original lefty anarchists, because anarchism obviously came from the left, and that's something people on the right just have to get straight. Historically,
Right.
libertarianism and anarchism, stateless societies were originally thought of as a communistic idea. It was a lefty attitude, but nevertheless, he basically just says the black flag. It's anarchism. As long as you're not coercing peaceful people, you can have your commune, you can do whatever you want. But he believes that a modern society would essentially be a market society, and and it's like you said, the more right leaning version of that is that it doesn't scale without, like, all anarchism, communism, any ideology basically that espouses a stateless society. It doesn't scale unless the population is homogenous in their moral critiques and their values. That's my opinion of it, but that's basically where I'm at with it. My politics, I mean, you can call me an ANCAP. I'm certainly an ANCAP. I've more recently been leaning, as we discussed outside of the video here, agorism, and it's basically agora is just the root word of market from ancient Greek philosophy, and it's a word that came up as the ancient city states started to realize that mercantilism, intervention in markets and what the market actually is, was not ideal, and that it prospers so long as there's no intervention. And that's where agora comes from. But the modern day agorist is essentially just black markets, gray markets, subverting the state, printing guns, things of this nature. And it's I forget, Sam Konkin the third. He's he's the originator, excuse me, of the agorist ideal. He had a book called The New Libertarian Manifesto, and it was essentially a lefty type of idea. He was trying to be more progressive with the way he said it, but essentially it's a cost benefit analysis. It's like we were discussing before I started recording. You're not going to advocate that people carry guns in a spot where there's heavy gun control. Obviously, you'll get locked up. What good for liberty is it if you're locked up, right? Same thing with taxes. It's like, if you got a good accountant and he can get you a couple loopholes and you can pay less taxes, fantastic. We're not going to tell people to outright not pay their taxes, because unless everybody did that, there'd just be a bunch of people in jail. So that's not it. But it's basically just there is no political solution. This is one of the few things. I mean, Rothbard was obviously a much greater man than I am, or could ever be. He was a polymath. I mean, the man was fluent in many different varieties of academia. So I don't aspire to be critiquing Rothbard. I just don't personally agree with the paleo strategy. And I mean, just the way I see it is, libertarians for the last almost 50 years now have been engaged in trying to co-opt or inject the libertarian ideals into the Republican Party. And I just don't see. I mean, maybe I'm wrong. I hope I am wrong. Maybe there is a political solution. I just hope that it's all peaceful, right? But
Right.
more or less, I don't see, especially today, the Republican establishment, or even just the vehicle of the party, is I feel like it's futile, but how do you
Right.
feel about that?
Right. You make a lot of good points. Like you were saying earlier about the whole idea of representative government applied over a very large area has been thought since essentially the foundations of representative government as a theory to be bunk. That's what Montesquieu wrote several hundred years ago. The extended republic is always going to degenerate into something that we can't have. It's going to become an ochlocracy. They'll literal rule by the mob.
Mm-hmm.
All the ancient city states that were democracies for a time, Athens, San Marino, the Swiss cantons, they were all very small states. And
Mm-hmm.
if you extend popular sovereignty over a very wide terrain, you're going to incorporate a bunch of people who don't think like you. And a large amount of them are probably going to be people who are statists, people who will trade liberty for security in some respect or another. And then you're
Mm-hmm.
going to get that security, or at least you'll get the illusion of it, which is going to destroy liberty in the process. But yes, uh, if there is a political solution, I think it would probably have to come by the multiplication of states and its division into smaller sovereignties, because power essentially follows the rule of economies of scale,
Mm-hmm.
whereby it becomes more efficient on the scale it's on. If it's done on a much bigger scale, you can have a lot more power than you could by the same territory, the same resources spread out wider. It's making power, it's making government a lot more inefficient. This is why the Holy Roman Empire never became a tyranny in the middle of Europe and stood for as long as it did. At the same time, it had all these innovations in liberty during its territory, such as Magdeburg Law and just a lot of the freest city states in Europe tended to be in the Central Europe, which was controlled by the Holy Roman Empire with such a light touch to government. So,
Mm-hmm.
say we do the same thing or something similar today, and the US reverts to a much lighter handed system. It's not going to be able to have a huge standing army anymore. It's not going to be able to fund 87,000 new tax collectors, the IRS private army. We're not going to be able to have the USDA SWAT team. We won't even be able to have a USDA probably, which is
Mhm.
all a big step in the right direction, if you ask me.
Yeah,
But I was
absolutely.
absolutely, I was really liking what you were going with about the whole competition and just the idea of agorism itself is
Mhm.
very attractive to me. But it just seems like it could go too far easily. But you totally rebutted that earlier by saying that we're not going to go in saying don't pay your taxes or something. I was
Sure.
reading an essay by Benjamin Tucker before we picked this one up, where
Mhm.
he was essentially saying that if in a given year you feel like you don't have a problem going to jail, you can avoid paying taxes and go to jail on principle, which is noble and all well and good. But
Mhm.
unless we do this on a massive scale, this isn't going to work, especially with how efficient prisons have become and the prison industrial complex. We will not be able to bring down the state this way, but as long as we're not doing something crazy like that, at just finding the loopholes in the tax structure and exploiting them in a totally legal way, just with a good accountant or a good investment broker, I don't
Mhm.
see how anyone who's liberty minded could possibly oppose this. I'm on board with it at least.
Yeah, yeah, it's a realist school of thought in my estimation. I mean, it's we we often in the liberty sphere we often we live in what they say, this is the term that's used, we live in Ancapistan in our head. We're all about philosophy, we know all about political economy, we know all about the Austrian theory of business cycles and monopoly theory and all of this, but that doesn't apply in a statist reality. We live underneath the largest centralized organization in human history, well, since we've been recording it anyways. And so it's basically just a realist thought that we do have a centralized bureaucracy, and there's two parties, right? But it's not Democrat and Republican. It is the establishment and then the plebs. That's us. We don't have any kind of the tyranny is encroaching further and further. Like you just said, the industrial complex of prisons in the supposed freest country in the world. That's an irony in and of itself. But I just I personally I don't claim to have the answers to all this shit. I just I actually come from a background of incredible indoctrination. I was raised in a very liberal urban area, satellite city of Detroit. It's a ghetto. The manufacturers left. The Pontiac Silverdome, where the Lions used to play, that left. Everything left, and it's just like every other liberal hellscape. It's just left in degeneracy and single parent households, which I hailed from. And it took me, I knew there was a lot, even the liberals, today's colloquial term liberals, they get some things right, like the militarization of police. That's a thing. I don't know about how systemically racist it is, but there are some racist police in the ghetto. And I witnessed all of this, and I had a sense that what they were telling me in school wasn't correct. There was something profusely pungent about the stink of this system. There was something wrong with it. I just couldn't put my finger on it. And plus, I had a very degenerate lifestyle, so I didn't much give a fuck, to be blatant. And it wasn't until I came to my senses. I had a kid, and my daughter's mother. She was pushing me in a certain direction, as she should have been. And basically having a kid changed my outlook on everything. And I would assume that happens to any decent human being. But it made me look further into the systems that we live under, because now I have a kid that I have to teach about this system, but I have no idea what the fuck the system is, right? So about a decade ago, it was just after the Ron Paul revolution, and it struck me as, yeah, this seems right. So I started to dig into it, and I start hearing about stateless societies and anarcho-capitalism and all this, and I'm like, no, where's the hole in it? There's got to be a hole in it. And I came out the other side an anarchist. So the left libertarian to anarcho-capitalist pipeline is a real thing. I'm a product of it. But as I get older, I find myself having more and more conservative sympathies when it comes to morals and not necessarily religion. I'm not a religious person, but I'm not an atheist who becomes so atheist that they're basically it's just another religion. I do believe that every human has a hole in them that they are going to fill with some kind of worship, whether that be idolatry of Hollywood or sports or some other Satanism, paganism, whatever. You're gonna fill that statism. I mean, fuck, we've seen enough of that over the last 3 years. You're going to fill that with something, right? So I mean, and you can't be objectively looking at the universe and say that there's not some um inventive construction. There's something like this isn't all random, and if it was, that would be a tragedy. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree with that. And I haven't reached a stage in my life to have a kid yet. I'm still in my early 20s.
Okay.
But going through like college, that's where I started to really learn about libertarianism. In fact, I'll drag it all the way back to high school when I first picked up a copy of The Road to Serfdom by Frederick Hayek. And I'm currently writing an article for the Mises Institute, God willing they publish it, about the Hayekian to Rothbardian pipeline because you
Mm-hmm.
look around, you don't see a lot of Hayekians, and there's a reason for this. It's
Mm-hmm.
because Hayek was quite frankly a sellout who
Mm-hmm.
countenanced the state and talked about single payer health care, and
Yeah.
he's endorsing
He
J.M.
compromised a lot
Keynes.
of principles, that's for sure. For a
Yes,
Rothbardian, that is.
absolutely. So so first you start off with Hayek. That's just middle of the road, but for the American paradigm, he's extreme, quote
Yeah,
unquote.
fairly radical for today's
Yes,
politics. Yeah.
yes. You start out with him, and then you obviously have to read Ludwig von Mises. For me, it was first his book Liberalism, the Classical Tradition, then Socialism and Economic and Sociological Analysis. Then you're down the road,
Mm-hmm.
and then you can start looking into other stuff like currently I'm reading the Ludwig von Mises lecture series, which is somewhere in the 40 some volumes, which is
Mm-hmm.
a lot of papers. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm still trying to get through Human Action, which is a formidable read. But
Yeah.
yeah, that's why I started studying libertarianism as a theory, and it
Mm-hmm.
really stuck to me because one of the things that I believe Oppenheimer, Franz Oppenheimer, made the point first that discussion of the state qua state. The state, just in the capacity of what it is conceptually, has totally vanished. Maybe it was Albert J. Nock who made that point. I don't know. It was one of those two. But
Mm-hmm.
he was saying that this whole brand of sociology, of political philosophy, is just gone. That's
Mm-hmm.
just a signal of how embodied the state is in our political philosophy, and how it's basically become a religion that we can't question. It's like some sort of Iranian theocracy or something, and we can't get
Yes.
around it. We don't even realize it's there anymore. And
Mm-hmm.
when you start seeing people like Oppenheimer, Albert J. Nock, Ludwig von Mises, Hans Hoppe, and Murray Rothbard, and all these other thinkers gone before, start talking about the state as an organism and what it does, its function historically, what it does to society, and how it degrades time preferences, and how those degraded time preferences lead to social decadence and degeneracy, a la Hans Hoppe. Then you start to realize that A, the state's a criminal organization and systemically bilking us, and B, a la Frank Chodorov, since society funds the state and the state is something that comes only after society is established, then ipso facto, it's unnecessary to the functioning of society.
Correct.
Then why
Yeah.
do we have to keep it?
And it's funny too, this it took me a long time to get to the distinction of statist and non-statist. Now, we live in reality. There's some people who are more libertarian leaning, and those are more our folks, right? But also, it's there is the distinction of political authority, and this I mean, statism is in fact a religion. I mean, they have the priests, they have the myths, they have the authority, they have all of it, right? But not even just that. but the fact that you can see the cognitive dissonance in somebody who is a statist, and you say you can't even posit a stateless society because that's just beyond fathomable to these kind of individuals. But you say, well, why can't it be voluntary, right? Why can't, like, if taxes are in fact voluntary, where's the form where we opt out? And watch the wheels turn in these people's head, and you'll see literal dissonance, and these people just can't handle it. But they're either going to react one of two ways: to look at it objectively, and they'll shut their mouth and they'll go learn about it, or they will just without any reproach just start defending statism, even if they're more libertarian leaning. People like Tim Pool come to mind. Like today I was watching him talk about the vote for the whatever, the Speaker of the House, and there's this big historical, they're not actually voting, and there's dissenters, and they're not picking Kevin McCarthy, and blah blah blah. But what stuck out to me wasn't even the fact that this hasn't happened in 100 years, or the fact that the political establishment is getting the most minute amount of pushback, right? And this is somehow historical. That wasn't what caught my eye. It was that repeatedly, over and over again, Tim Pool idealizes libertarianism and how much he would like people to leave him alone. But then he consistently interjects, I'm not an anarchist. I'm not an anarchist. I don't believe in anarchism. And he constantly posits that anarchism is utopian. That's absolutely fascinating to me. You would rather live under an anarcho-capitalist society because they'll leave you alone, but you can't possibly understand that we have scores and scores of information that just keeps on piling up, that the utopian position is that states are in fact functioning, and that they
My
can
computer's about to die. I'm sorry. Got
no,
to
no,
plug it
you're
in.
all right. You're all right. Take your
Keep
time.
going. I'm listening.
Okay, yeah, no, it's just basically what I was saying is, if a state is so beneficial, then why is it that you would be more benefited in your mind under a stateless society because they would leave you alone? And this is the general theme that I get, is that anarchism is utopian, and the proper way to go about it is to try and roll back the state. And this is also why I disagree with the paleo strategy. Is just it doesn't seem realistic to me. Utopianism means that it's just something far fetched. It's aloof. It's something you can't actually. It's not tangible, right? But what is least tangible than a government that doesn't tyrannize their citizens? It's not. I don't think it's a coincidence that every single experiment in history in restraining government has resulted in an empire. I don't believe that to be a coincidence. I believe that basically the Articles of Confederation, if you're going to have some kind of centralized governance, it has to be as decentralized as possible. And, multiple historians, including Rothbardians and Rothbard himself, have pointed out that the Articles of Confederation didn't fail, and the Constitution was essentially a coup de main. And they just wanted, the founding fathers were hardcore centralizers of power, right? The Articles of Confederation were doing just fine because they weren't allowing the power grab, but because they want, like, what really enlightened me to this idea of the Constitution being a coup. And I know the constitutionalists hate to hear it said like that, but that's what it was. But read the Anti-Federalists. Everybody's read the Federalist Papers. Read the Anti-Federalists. Everything that they were worried about actually came true.
Absolutely. I 100% agree. In fact, I have the collected works of the Anti-Federalist right here that I can just pull off the shelf, annotated
Fantastic.
in its entirety.
I love
But
it.
yes, completely down the memory hole. Nobody cares about that anymore. And God help you if you read the 10th Amendment. That's
Yeah.
also down the memory hole.
Nullification. Yeah. Yeah. That's why I try to turn people on to Tom Woods. Not only did he write a book on it, and he's constantly involved in the 10th Amendment Center, but it's like up until Abraham Lincoln, there was no discussion about secession being a thing. It wasn't until he used the tyrannical, he suspended habeas corpus. And I mean, it just, that's a whole nother rabbit hole of how tyrannical Abraham Lincoln was. He wasn't the Republican hero, the emancipator that they make him out to be. Our history is as much bullshit as our fake news is today. I found a very keen interest in revisionists.
Oh, yes, I 100% agree with you. on the other podcast I co-host, Tusk, which
Mhm.
it would be very cash money if y'all would tune into that. But
Yeah, go
that's
check
just
them out.
my personal plug there.
Sure,
We
sure.
rated some presidents not too long ago, and I took flack from my other libertarian co-host, not quite as extreme as I am, but still a very solid libertarian, about how I just hated on Abraham Lincoln for like 20 minutes straight. Hey, and called him a tyrant in no uncertain terms, which is a very unpopular position to take, especially if you're a man who caucuses, even if with the right, or you're involved with virtually anything outside the radical libertarian movement. Everyone
Yeah.
else puts Lincoln on a pedestal. He's the greatest president. He did this. He did that. He
The Republican Party
oh
and
oh
blah blah
no.
blah. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yes, it's
Yeah,
amazing. So
it's
oh
fascinating to
no.
me how many people can't stand the education system in this country, but yet they stand up and pledge allegiance to the flag as the education system tells them to. They praise the same historical narrative that is fed to them in this educational system, and it's it just shows the level of indoctrination on both sides. I would consider myself, and so would contemporary, they would consider me far right because I want an anarcho-capitalist society or whatever. But I would consider, like, even just morally, like, I mean, like, don't get me wrong, I have plenty of positions that would be considered quote unquote liberal, but like drugs, for instance, I say just legalize all of it, because everything is a give and take. And right now, with the war on drugs, we have more people locked up for nonviolent drug offenses than anywhere in the world, right? So it's like, are we going to be haggling over decriminalization of this or that, or the fact that the establishment and the pharmaceutical industry has literally put an epidemic of opioids at our doorstep? Or are we just going to let people who oh, yeah, my bad, or are we just going to let people do what they choose to do? It's not to say that you're going to get some kind of utopia, but you'll have a lot less tax burden for the pragmatic, because you won't be subsidizing all of this militarized police and such. Not to mention, I mean, the list just goes on and on. But um, essentially, the GOPers today, I can't personally get in line with them, because it's like they mask their neoconservatism in libertarian rhetoric, and it gets folks to, sure, that it's just like everything the establishment does. They find a wedge issue, they push it in between, they polarize their base, and then they high five each other on the way out of Congress. None of it seems practical to me.
That's exactly the problem. And what gets me, especially like how you're talking about the war on drugs, is that the a lot of the mainstream commentators, these neocons out there, and their equivalent establishment Democrats are going to. They always paint the libertarians as the weed party. It's a single issue
Yeah,
party. It's a
pot
single issue
smoking
movement.
Republicans, right? Right.
Yes, remove weed, and then the everything, the whole edifice of libertarianism, from Rothbard, Mises, Lysander Spooner,
Yeah,
everything is
yeah.
going to just come crashing down. It's
Yeah,
amazing.
they do a good job of because even the minarchists, I don't, I'm not sure, I would assume you're in that category or whatever. But it's like, even the
That's right.
minarchists who are based, and they see the political corruption for what it is. It's like they have this way of deeming a narrative that just takes hold. That's the most fascinating thing about the establishment to me, is that even through all of the in spite of all of the things that have happened in just the last decade, let alone the last 3 years, that these people have any amount of credibility with regular people. It's absolutely fascinating.
Indeed, indeed. I I wrote a piece on this the other day for my blog, theconservativecritique.com, which I try to regularly write for. It doesn't always work, but
Sure.
where I was talking about again about the libertarian caricature, as I like to call it, the people who it's just that they just think the libertarians just want to legalize weed. That's obviously not the way
Mm-hmm.
this works. I usually respond to those caricature complaints just by saying that one Lysander Spooner quote, just vices are not crimes. And
Right.
the state shouldn't be punishing moral wrongdoings, essentially. The moral wrongdoings can be punished by God in the next life. And to usurp the power and punishment of God and give that to the state is, in my mind, actually terrible blasphemy. So I don't sanction that at all. But at the same time, I'm just libertarianism is about so much other stuff. Most of the conversations I have with libertarian activists are not about drug policy. Just we can talk about that. Vices are not crimes. End of story. Legalized.
Right.
Most of it's about like radical decentralization. How are we going to drain the power out of Washington and get it first to states and then further on down? Maybe even like not maybe even, but to the individual level as much as we physically can,
Mm-hmm.
and to do so peacefully. I think, like I said earlier, secession is going to be one of the best ways going forward for this. Secession is on the rise worldwide. This isn't like some sort of thing that the Confederacy invented that you can just tar all secession as racist.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, the United States was created by a secession event. The Soviet Union was destroyed by over a dozen secession events. There are active secession events all over. They're in the UK, they're in Spain, they're all over the place. And
Mm-hmm.
nobody's calling all these people neo Confederates. I'm pretty sure that the Russians, when they seceded from the Soviet Union, weren't neo Confederates, but
Right,
that's
right.
a
And then on top
side
of it,
point.
in the 2016 election leading up to it, John Podesta was the first one to say that California should secede if Donald Trump was elected. Now, ultimately, they didn't do it. I wish they would have, but we need a precedent set that says that that is okay, because there's nothing constitutional wise, if you want to talk about legality, there's nothing that says that it shouldn't be. It's just a precedent that was set in the past, and all paradigms can be broken. And it seems as though we're headed down that road. I can only hope. I think realistically, that is going to be what happens. I hope to God it's peaceful, but it seems as though we have unreconcilable differences between the culture war factions, which that's what determines my. A lot of people in the Western world often dichotomized between left and right by socioeconomic status, whether or not you're a capitalist or you're a socialist or whatever. But in all reality, Republicans are socialists. They don't have any problem redistributing wealth. It's just for their agenda, and vice versa for the liberals. That's why they pretend to banter around in Congress. But at the end of the day, they're all stealing our money and then passing it out to their cronies. I don't care if you're Trump or you're Biden or whatever. And this idea that Biden is the worst president ever, that's I can literally just push you to the side as a nonsensical person if you believe that. Because, I mean, after the institution of the Federal Reserve and FDR and Woodrow Wilson, if you can honestly look at this presidency, sure, he's a clown show. He's an obvious Manchurian candidate. Nobody thinks the man doesn't have dementia, but that doesn't mean that he's capable. And he's just a puppet. That's the way I see it. Sure, he's doing terrible things to the economy, but he's also the perfect fall guy for the last 100 years of radical money printing. So it's like, if you understand the Austrian business cycle, you know that it is the proxy of the money printers that controls everything. That's why I think separation church and state was the paradigm at the beginning of this country. That's what was so radical. They get the state out of everything, get the church out of everything. You can have whatever you want of either, but it's got to be voluntary and they can't be combined. I believe that that's going to be the next paradigm. Is you're going to separate money, financials, banks from the state. Now, technically, we have a private Federal Reserve, but anybody who doesn't think that's a quasi-fascist private government cooperation there is deluded. But I honestly believe that that's going to be what happens. People are going to want hard money. The dollar is going to fail. I mean, none of this is sustainable, whether it's financial, politically, culturally. None of it's sustainable. I mean, you got people literally castrating their children, aborting their children. That's not sustainable. The dollar will fail if they keep hyperinflating it the way they are. That's not sustainable. I mean, this is obviously sham elections and such. That's not sustainable. So I just hope that when it all comes to a head, that it is peaceful, because at the end of the day, I am of the non-aggression principle. I don't believe in uncoercive or coercing or violently offending peaceful people, right? But
In,
yeah, so go ahead.
indeed, I'm don't find anything to disagree with there. I really hope that
I find it fascinating that people disagree with that at all.
absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, I really hope that no crazy violence shit happens at the close of the American Empire. I was in the Marines briefly, but I had to get into there right when the COVID vaccine mandate hit. So I was one of the dudes they processed out for that. They kept me in essentially a minimum security prison for 6 months because of that. There is a book forthcoming on this, so keep watching
It's
out for that.
absurd to me the way they treat those gentlemen, because while I don't, the most the most ardent supporters of isolationism and getting out of all of this foreign adventurism are typically, in my experience, are the veterans who come home missing limbs, and friends, and the widows, and the fatherless children. And it seems to, and I mean, Ron Paul proved this without a doubt when he ran in 08 and 2012, that he had more support than the entire Republican establishment from the veterans. So, I mean, that just speaks volumes, in my opinion.
I don't know one interventionist pro-war dude who's out of the military.
Of
I
course not. They're
literally
the
don't
ones who
know
are
one.
fighting for these fucking oligarchs. Of course not.
It's groundbreaking, isn't it? And then
Yeah.
they try to trot out a couple. I don't know where they find these people who are interventionists, and then try to get them to simp for Lockheed Martin and shit. It's just groundbreaking.
Yeah, it's something fantastic. All right. Well, we're coming to the end here. If you want to plug something, go ahead.
Uh my website, theconservativecritique.com. I love it. Trying to write for it more doesn't always work, but I'm trying to publish regularly again. And my other podcast, Tusk, where it doesn't have a page yet, but we're on YouTube, Stitcher, Deezer, and virtually anywhere you can get podcasts. Thanks
All
for
right.
having me. Love to be
Uh,
on here again.
Appreciate you. We'll be talking to you soon.
Thank you.